In a sleepy Welsh village, a woman's wild stories kept her neighbors entertained for 18 years, until the discovery of a chilling secret wrapped in layers of lies would leave them reeling. Across the ocean, a picture-perfect romance between a ballerina and a businessman spiraled into a deadly showdown that had everyone asking, was it self-defense or cold-blooded murder? What do these two shocking cases have in common? The answer lies in the dark truths that only came to light after their final fatal acts. Lee Ann Sabine. For 18 years, Lee Ann Sabine fooled everyone. She was the eccentric neighbor with outrageous stories, the charming older woman who seemed to live for attention. But no one could have imagined the dark secret she was hiding in her small Welsh village. In November 2015, the death of a reclusive woman named Lee Ann Sabine from brain cancer stirred little immediate attention. To her neighbors in Bedow, South Wales, Lee was known for her eccentric stories and odd behavior, earning her the nickname Mad Lee. But when her neighbor began sorting through Lee's belongings after her death, the unassuming small town was thrust into a macabre mystery. Hidden among the layers of plastic and foil, Lee had been concealing a chilling secret, one that she had hinted at for years, but no one had taken seriously. Lee was born in the Welsh village of Gelly, where her early life was shaped by instability. Abandoned by her mother and raised by her father, a coal miner, she spent her childhood moving between relatives and orphanages. This unstable upbringing may have contributed to her flamboyant and attention-seeking personality as an adult. At 17, she left her troubled childhood behind and moved to London, where she worked as a nurse. It was during this time that she met John Sabine, a man 11 years her senior. John was married with 2 children at the time, but their affair led to his wife throwing him out when Lee became pregnant. Their relationship, marked by its rocky beginnings, would become even more tumultuous. Throughout her life, Lee portrayed herself as someone larger than life. She often told people that she had been a cabaret singer, a supermodel, and a fashion icon, spinning wild tales of her glamorous past. But most of these stories were fabrications, mere distractions from the real secrets she was hiding. Neighbors found her odd, yet entertaining. She was known for dressing in bold outfits and her unpredictable behavior, making her a fixture in the local community. John, on the other hand, was a quiet, unassuming man, described as soft-hearted by those who knew him. A veteran of the Korean War, he returned to civilian life in Britain as an accountant. However, his life was not without troubles. John's career was tarnished by accusations of fraud, leading the Sabine family to flee Britain in 1965 to avoid legal consequences. That's when the couple emigrated with their 5 children, aged between 2 and 11 years old. They lived under assumed names and frequently uprooted their lives to avoid further consequences. Their journey took them across Australia and New Zealand. But one of the most shocking aspects of the couple's rocky life together was their decision to abandon their 5 young children in New Zealand. They lived under the radar for a while, trying to escape their past. But in 1969, seemingly without warning or explanation, the couple left all 5 children at a nursery in Auckland. This move stunned those who knew them, but was also widely covered by the New Zealand media, where the two earned the notorious name the child-dumping couple. Lee and John did not return to collect their children, nor did they provide any care or support for them. They simply disappeared from their children's lives, leaving them at the mercy of New Zealand authorities. The children were left to fend for themselves, deeply scarred by their parents' betrayal. They were eventually placed in care, separated from one another, and raised in foster homes. Years later, in the mid-1980s, John and Lee attempted to reestablish contact with their children, but the damage had already been done. Their daughters, Jane and Lee Ann, were so disturbed by the abandonment that they alerted New Zealand authorities when their parents tried to reach out. Their reunion was unsuccessful, and the Sabines' relationship with their children remained fractured. While John had once been described as soft-hearted, this act of abandonment showed how far he and Lee were willing to go to free themselves from responsibility. For Lee, it was just another chapter of constant reinvention, leaving behind whatever or whoever no longer fitted the narrative she wanted to create. By the time they settled in Bedow, South Wales, in 1996, the couple had distanced themselves from their past, living a quiet life without close friends or family nearby. The tension in the marriage was apparent to neighbors, with Lee often publicly belittling John. Yet, no one suspected that their relationship would end in murder. Then, in 1997, John disappeared without trace. Lee told neighbors that her husband had left her for another woman, describing him as a womanizer. No one questioned this explanation, as John had always been somewhat of a recluse, and Lee's domineering personality led people to accept whatever story she told. But, in reality, John hadn't left of his own accord. Lee had killed him. Using an ornamental stone frog from their bedside, Lee struck John in the head, killing him instantly. After the murder, she wrapped his body in layers of plastic and bags, mummifying him in the process. She initially stored the body under their bed, allowing her to maintain the illusion that he had simply left. Over time, she moved the body to a communal garden shed and eventually to her attic, hiding the evidence for the next 18 years. And because their kids had been estranged from the couple for much of their lives, no one even noticed that John had gone missing. For nearly 2 decades, Lee lived with John's body hidden in her flat, all while continuing to collect his pension. During this time, she told neighbors and friends that she had a skeleton in her house, which she claimed was a medical tool from her days as a trainee nurse. Yet, no one took her seriously, until it was too late. By 2015, Lee was gravely ill with brain cancer. As her health deteriorated, she began to drop more explicit hints about the dark secret she had been keeping for so long. She confided in her hairdresser that the spotlight was coming because of the body. However, like many of her other statements, this too was dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. Lee had always loved being at the center of attention, and those around her assumed she was merely playing to her theatrical personality. Even as she neared death, Lee remained her flamboyant self. She hired a photographer to capture her in a series of glamorous shots, and predicted that her fame was just around the corner. What no one knew was that her fame wouldn't come from her fictitious past as a singer or model, but from the discovery of her husband's body. After Lee's death, her belongings were discarded by her neighbors and friends, including Michelle James, who had taken on the role of caregiver in her final months. Among the items left in the communal garden was what Lee had always claimed was a medical skeleton. Thinking it would be a fun prank to play on another neighbor, Michelle decided to retrieve the skeleton as a joke. She expected nothing more than a harmless prop, but found something far more gruesome. Michelle and another neighbor began cutting through the plastic. They were hit by an overwhelming stench and a pool of black sludge from the package. At that moment, Michelle realized that this was no prank. This was a human body. When authorities arrived, they found the decayed remains, which were still dressed in pajamas and tightly wrapped in multiple layers of plastic. Initially, police assumed that the body was that of a middle-aged man who had been killed relatively recently. Michelle was briefly arrested under suspicion of murder. In a panic, she pleaded with police, insisting that the body had something to do with Lee. However, the full scope of what happened wouldn't be clear until much later. At first, investigators struggled to identify the body. The fingerprints led nowhere, and no immediate clues could confirm the man's identity. The investigation began to stall until someone close to Lee came forward with a critical piece of information. Lee Ann unexpectedly confessed during a 1997 phone call to her old acquaintance, Valerie Chalkley. When Valerie jokingly remarked that it had been so long since she'd heard from the Sabines that one of them must have killed the other, Lee casually responded, "It's funny you should say that. I've killed him. I battered him with a stone frog." She explained that John had been driving her mad with his constant crying and complaints that she no longer fancied him. Valerie assumed Lee was joking, dismissed the confession, and even turned it into a family joke. This confession gave the police a critical lead, and the timeline started to fall into place. Lee claimed John had run off in the late 1990s, and the pajamas on the corpse were of a style discontinued in 1999. The wrapping materials, too, included old plastic bags from supermarkets that hadn't been in use for years. The next step was to conduct a DNA test. When they compared the DNA of the body with that of a relative, it confirmed the chilling truth. The body was that of John Sabine, Lee's long-missing husband. Lee had managed to conceal his death for nearly 20 years, hiding his mummified remains under her bed, in her attic, and finally in the garden's shed. Further examination of John's body showed he had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators found that the shape of the injury matched a specific object, an ornamental frog, which had been left among Lee's personal belongings after her death. As the pieces fell into place, a motive for the murder began to emerge. Lee had long harbored resentment toward John, particularly after he expressed remorse for their decision in the 1960s to abandon their 5 young children in New Zealand. In the end, this bitterness festered into violence, leading Lee to murder her husband and conceal his body for almost 2 decades. Lee's eccentric behavior had long hidden her from suspicion. The investigation revealed that Lee had not only killed her husband, but had lived with his body hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. What made Lee so dangerous was her ability to mix truth with fiction, using her theatrics to hide the darker parts of her life. She dared to joke about her husband's murder, knowing that no one would believe her. In the end, her death revealed the truth, but not before she had achieved the attention she had always craved, albeit for reasons far darker than anyone could have imagined. Ashley Benefield. A glamorous ballerina, a whirlwind marriage, a deadly shot to the back. When Ashley Benefield pulled the trigger on her estranged husband, Doug, the shocking unraveling of their picture-perfect romance left everyone asking, was this self-defense or a cold-blooded plan to gain custody of their daughter? Dive into the chilling Black Swan murder case that gripped the nation and discover the dark secrets behind this fatal love story. Doug Benefield and Ashley Byers' story began in August 2016 at a high-profile Republican fundraising event in Palm Beach, Florida. Doug, a 54-year-old businessman, had been married twice before, only briefly in his 20s, and again to his second wife, Renee, who died suddenly the year before. A Navy veteran turned entrepreneur, Doug was charming, driven, and, at that point in his life, searching for something new. Ashley, on the other hand, was a 24-year-old former ballerina dancer. She had devoted her life to dance, but her career had faltered, leaving her struggling to find her place in the world. Meeting Doug felt like a stroke of fate. Despite their 30-year age gap, it clicked immediately. Over the next few days, they exchanged text messages with the intensity of new lovers, talking about everything from their shared Christian faith to the love for guns. It was a whirlwind romance, and within days, they professed their love for each other. By September, just 6 days after they met, they had already exchanged I love yous. When Doug returned from a work trip, they decided to marry. It was a secret wedding held just 13 days after their first meeting at St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Charleston. There were no guests, not even Doug's teenage daughter Eva, who was still mourning the loss of their mother Renee. Doug had kept the marriage hidden from her, and that secrecy foreshadowed the tensions that would soon begin to unravel. Doug and Ashley's relationship took a professional turn when they co-founded the American National Ballet, A&B, with a mission to reshape the ballet world. The company sought to recruit dancers who didn't fit the industry's rigid norms. They planned to give opportunities to dancers of all sizes, shapes, and ethnic backgrounds. For many, A&B seemed like a dream come true. But behind the scenes, cracks were already beginning to show. The dancers arrived in September 2017 to luxury apartments as promised, but there was no rehearsal studio, clear schedule, or performance dates. Ashley, who was meant to be the face of the company, was nowhere to be found. She had quietly moved to Florida, leaving Doug to oversee the chaotic launch of their ambitious project. As the days passed, the dancers grew more concerned. The company's promises of stability began to crumble, and red flags started to appear. On payday, the dancers were paid in envelopes stuffed with cash. No checks, no direct deposits. The company's finances were already unraveling for Doug. But the strain wasn't only professional. His marriage to Ashley was beginning to crack under the weight of their personal and business pressures. Doug had been sinking in large amounts of money into A&B, hoping the venture would succeed. But at home, tension was mounting. Ashley struggled to bond with Doug's teenage daughter, Eva. Doug's close relationship with his daughter made Ashley jealous, and the strain only increased when she discovered that Eva disliked her. Their arguments became heated, and things took a violent turn in the summer of 2017. Doug, in a fit of anger, threw a loaded gun across the room, lodging a bullet in the ceiling, and also punched the family dog. By August 2017, Ashley was pregnant. But instead of bringing the couple closer together, the pregnancy added to their mounting stress. Ashley's severe morning sickness left her bedridden, and she moved to Florida to be cared for by her mother. The physical distance between the couple marked the beginning of the end. On September 18, 2017, while Doug was busy with the A&B launch, Ashley returned to Charleston without telling him. She packed her belongings, left a note detailing his abusive behavior, and fled back to Florida. The note outlined incidents of Doug's temper, including the time he had fired the gun into the ceiling and thrown objects during their fights. She told him not to contact her, warning that she would seek a restraining order if he did. He sent her desperate texts, apologizing and promising to change. He swore he would go to therapy and get rid of his guns. But Ashley didn't respond, except for brief discussions about A&B business matters. The emotional distance between them grew, and Doug's final struggles worsened as A&B collapsed under the weight of its unfulfilled promises. Then, in November 2017, Ashley's health took a sudden downturn. She reportedly began experiencing sharp pains and severe fatigue. After several doctor visits failed to provide answers, she sent a lock of her hair to a lab for analysis. The results she presented were shocking. High levels of toxic metals, including aluminium and barium, were found in her system. Ashley became convinced that Doug had been poisoning her. She thought about the tea he made for her every morning during their time together, and began to suspect that he had been secretly slipping poison into her drinks. Ashley's poisoning allegations weren't the first time Doug's character had been questioned. Ashley believed that Doug had also poisoned his second wife, Renee, who had died unexpectedly in 2015. Text messages between the couple also indicate that Doug had been violent with her. Renee had reportedly been in good health, but in the year leading up to her death, she had experienced several unexplained fainting spells. Though Renee's death had been ruled as a heart condition, Ashley's suspicions cast a shadow over Doug's past. Despite the serious nature of Ashley's accusations, there was little concrete evidence to support them, and a judge would later rule that there was not an ounce of truth in Ashley's poisoning allegations. Still, the tension between the couple continued to escalate. In early 2018, their daughter was born 3 weeks early, and in secret. The news would take more than a month to reach Doug, which would set in motion a custody battle that would only add fuel to the fire. By the summer of 2018, Doug and Ashley had entered into a contentious court battle. Doug would see his daughter for the first time when she was 6 months old. Ashley sought full custody of her daughter, alleging domestic abuse and attempted poisoning, while Doug fought for his rights as a father, maintaining that Ashley's claims were unfounded. He was eventually granted visitation privileges with his daughter. In 2019, Ashley arrived wearing an engagement ring, prompting Doug to hire a private investigator who confirmed she was seeing someone else. Doug then filed for divorce. In response, Ashley accused him of physically and sexually abusing their daughter, but CPS found no evidence. Then, in May 2020, Ashley appeared to have a change of heart. She reached out to Doug, suggesting they meet to discuss their future, and even mentioning the possibility of attending trauma therapy together. Ever the optimist about the relationship, Doug was encouraged by her willingness to talk. He thought they could reconcile and start over. They began going on dates again, visiting restaurants and walking along the beach as if they could put the past behind them. By August 2020, they even discussed moving together to Maryland for a fresh start. Doug was beginning a new job there, and Ashley seemed open to starting over in a new city. Despite his lawyer's warning that Ashley might be manipulating him to gain legal advantage, Doug rented a U-Haul and began preparing for the move. But Doug secretly also had his doubts. In private emails to his lawyer, he admitted he didn't fully trust Ashley. He was concerned that her sudden change of heart might be a strategy to restart their legal battle in a new state. Nevertheless, Doug allowed himself to hope. On September 27, 2020, they were together again, packing Ashley's belongings at her mother's house in Florida. And the following day, they were scheduled to attend a custody hearing via Zoom, and Doug believed that they would finally begin the next chapter of their lives. That night, however, everything changed. A neighbor called 911 after Ashley ran to his house, claiming Doug attacked her. When deputies arrived, they found Doug lying on the floor of Ashley's bedroom, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. He'd been shot in the leg, arm, and chest. Doug was unarmed, and investigators would later conclude that he had not been facing Ashley when the shooting began. There were bullets lodged in the walls, and a stray round had landed on the floor nearby. Ashley claimed she had acted in self-defense. She told police that she had been afraid for her life, but investigators noted that she had no visible injuries, apart from an old minor scratch. The evidence didn't support Ashley's claim of self-defense. The trajectory of the bullets and the lack of defensive wounds on Doug's body suggested that he wasn't attacking her when she shot him. The police report noted that Doug was not in a combative stance and hadn't posed an immediate threat. Ashley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, but she was released on bond while awaiting trial. Her viral mugshot, a striking image of her staring coldly into the camera, made headlines, and the media quickly seized on the sensational elements of the case: the whirlwind romance, the ballet company that had collapsed, the allegations of poisoning, and now murder. Eva, now left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, was filled with questions. She struggled to understand how things had gone so wrong. Now, she was left with memories and endless speculation about the events that had led to his death. On social media, she shared her grief with the world, posting TikToks about the woman who had taken so much from her. On July 23, 2024, Ashley's trial began in Florida. The prosecution argued that Ashley never intended to allow Doug to be a part of their daughter's life and had fabricated the abuse claims to gain full custody. They painted the shooting as part of a plan to ensure Doug would be out of the picture. In her defense, Ashley claimed she acted in self-defense, fearing for her life. She stated that Doug had been abusive, and when authorities didn't help, she felt she had no choice. Her defense also argued that she suffered from battered woman syndrome, affecting her ability to think clearly in dangerous situations. After 6 days of testimony, the jury lowered the charge from second-degree murder to manslaughter with a firearm. Ashley was found guilty and now faces up to 30 years in prison, with sentencing yet to be scheduled.